My husband's pregnant mistress sat in my mother's chair, so I said one sentence and watched his whole family go pale. When my husband's affair ended in pregnancy, his family told me to leave. I did not argue. I said one sentence, and I watched every face in that room go pale. Their apologies came too late. By then, the pregnant woman was already sitting in my mother's chair. Not a chair I had bought, not some random furniture piece from a store that I could replace without thinking. My mother's chair, the high-backed ivory armchair she had reupholstered herself 3 times across 30 years. The chair with the faint coffee ring on the left armrest from the morning she died. The ring I had never cleaned, because it felt like the last thing she had ever touched. And there sat Ariane, 24 years old, 7 months pregnant, with wide brown eyes doing their best impression of innocence. One manicured hand rested on her swollen stomach. The other slowly traced the embroidered edge of that armrest, like she was already pricing it in her head. I stood in the doorway of my own living room and counted 6 people who had no right to be there. 6 people who had let themselves in, using the spare key my husband kept on his keychain. 6 people who had apparently helped themselves to my good tea. And I thought, they have no idea what they just walked into. So I smiled. Not the smile of a woman who found something funny, the smile of someone sitting very still at a poker table while holding cards that would make the dealer weep. Let me go back. Because you need to understand what this house means before you can understand what happened inside it that evening. My name is Maria Concepcion de los Reyes Villanueva. Though after everything I am about to tell you, only the first half of that name still belongs to me, and I am keeping it with both fists. I am 31 years old. I am a licensed CPA, and I work as a senior financial analyst at a property development firm. I am the daughter of Elena de los Reyes, the woman who built this house in Quezon City with money she saved for 11 years while working double shifts as a nurse in Saudi Arabia. She came home with calloused hands, a bad knee, and one single dream, that her daughter would never, ever have to beg anyone for shelter. My mother was not a romantic woman. She was practical in the way women who survive hard things become practical. Efficient, unsentimental, always 3 steps ahead of disaster. When I told her I was marrying Adrian Villanueva, she said 2 things. First, he has a soft face. Watch men with soft faces. Second, this house stays in your name. I thought she was being dramatic. I signed the papers anyway, because she insisted, because she was paying the lawyer, and because arguing with Elena de los Reyes about property law was about as useful as arguing with a wall about load-bearing capacity. She died 14 months after the wedding. Breast cancer, diagnosed late, moved fast. I held her hand at 4:17 in the morning on a Tuesday, and she told me, in a voice barely louder than breath, "The house, Maria, don't be soft." I was not soft. Adrian was. Though, I saw it early and chose to call it kindness. His easygoing charm, his inability to hold a hard conversation, his habit of disappearing into himself whenever things became uncomfortable. I told myself those were manageable flaws. I told myself I was strong enough for both of us. For 5 years, I believed that. For 5 years, I funded his ventures. The restaurant that closed in 8 months. The logistics startup that bled money for 2 years before he sold it, which really meant he walked away from debts I helped him clear. The consulting firm that mostly consisted of Adrian taking clients to lunch on our joint credit card and calling it networking. I was not blind. I was invested. Sunk cost fallacy wearing the face of loyalty. I noticed the small things. The nights he came home smelling not like himself. The way he started sleeping on his side of the bed with a deliberateness that felt architectural, as if he were building a wall between us 1 centimeter at a time. The phone that was suddenly always face down. The business trip to Davao in March that his colleague accidentally mentioned had actually happened last November. Every time, I told myself a story. He is stressed. It is the business. He needs space. I was so busy being reasonable that I almost missed the entire thing. The first crack I could not cover happened on a Wednesday in September. I came home early, at 3:30 in the afternoon, which almost never happened because our office building lost power and they sent everyone home. I remember the exact quality of the light that afternoon, honey-colored and thick, the kind of light that makes everything look more peaceful than it really is. I found a receipt on the kitchen counter. It was not hidden. It was just lying there, lazy and careless, the way guilty things often reveal themselves. Not through dramatic exposure, but through someone's simple failure to be careful enough. Hotel Sarah, BGC. September 8th. Deluxe room. 2 nights. Room service. Dinner for 2. Breakfast for 2. Adrian had told me he was at a team-building seminar in Tagaytay from the 7th to the 9th. My hands did not shake. That surprised me. I had imagined that moment before. Most women in long marriages run the scenario at some point, that horrible hypothetical. I had imagined collapsing, screaming, some operatic devastation. Instead, I took a photo of the receipt with my phone, put it exactly where I had found it, and went to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed for 2 hours. I did not cry. I thought about my mother, then I thought about lawyers. I want to be precise about what happened next, because this is where most women in my position make the mistake of moving too fast or too loudly. I did not confront Adrian. I know that sounds cold, but here's what I understood during those 2 hours on the edge of our bed. A confronted man becomes a defensive man, and a defensive man destroys evidence. So the next morning, I called Addie, Rosario Bernardo Tan, a family law practitioner with 22 years of experience, whose number I had saved in my phone under insurance because my mother made me put it there 2 weeks before the wedding. Just in case, my mother had said. Mama, that is terrible, I had told her. She only said, put it in your phone, Maria. So I put it in my phone. Addie, Bernardo Tan's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Ortigas. She was in her 50s, wore her gray hair in a clean low bun, and had the kind of eyes that had heard every version of every story and were still paying attention. After I laid out what I had found, her first question was not, "Are you sure?" It was not, "Have you talked to him?" Her first question was, "Is the house in your name?" "Yes," I said, "solely. Paraphanal property, never commingled." She allowed herself the smallest smile. "Good. Your mother was a wise woman." She was. "All right, Maria," she said. "Here is what we do." What we did over the next 6 weeks was build a case the way you build a foundation. Methodically, quietly, with materials that could not be disputed. Addie, Bernardo Tan, connected me with a licensed private investigator named Dennis Aguilar, a retired NBI investigator who wore button-down shirts and spoke with the calm, unhurried manner of a man who had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. He charged 85,000 pesos for a 3-week surveillance package. I paid it from a personal account Adrian did not know existed. I had opened it 3 years earlier for what I called independent savings, and what I now understood was a quiet internal alarm I had never allowed myself to fully hear. Dennis delivered his report on a Thursday. He met me in a coffee shop in Katipunan, sat across from me, and slid a manila envelope across the table. "Hotel receipts from 6 separate stays over 4 months, he said, his voice flat and professional. 214 text messages, screenshots taken with consent from a source, photographs, and... He paused briefly. "This is the part you will want to brace for," I said. "Tell me." "She is pregnant, 7 months. I stared at the envelope in my hands. 7 months. I counted backward. He would have known. Adrian would have known for months, and he had continued sleeping beside me. Eating meals I cooked, letting me manage his finances, letting me be his wife. Knowing. My tea went cold on the table. I did not cry in front of Dennis Aguilar. I waited until I was in my car, alone in the parking structure, in the dark. I cried for 9 minutes. I know it was 9 minutes because I watched the clock. When those 9 minutes were over, I started making calls. The second professional I brought in was Dr. Patricia Morales, an OB-GYN at Street Luke's, whom I had been seeing for my annual checkups for 4 years. I made an appointment and went in the following week, not for the reason I will eventually tell you, but to confirm something I had been quietly monitoring for about 10 days. As it turned out, I was 5 weeks pregnant. Dr. Morales was warm and efficient in equal measure, the kind of doctor who gives you information and trusts you to handle it like an adult. She confirmed the pregnancy, ran the initial blood work, and scheduled my next appointment. I sat in the parking lot of Street Luke's for a very long time. This baby was mine. Whatever was about to happen in the coming weeks, the lawyers, the confrontations, the unraveling, this baby was mine. This house was mine. I was my mother's daughter, and no one was taking anything. I called Eddie, Bernardo Tan, and told her, There was a brief pause. Maria, she said, this changes your position significantly. It does not change our strategy. If anything, it strengthens it. I know, I said. You have not told Adrian? Not yet. Keep it that way for now. So I kept it that way. I found out about the intervention. That is the only word for what they were planning. I found out through a phone call I was not supposed to hear. It was a Sunday. Adrian was in the backyard taking a call, and I was in the kitchen with the window open above the sink. He must have forgotten about the window, or maybe he had simply stopped being careful. I heard him say, "Yes, Ma, Tuesday at 7, she will be home." No, I do not want a scene. I just want it to be, "Ma? I know. Yes, bring Tito Roberto. Bring Gina. Ariane has to come too. She has to be there, so Maria understands this is real. I am not a coward. Okay. Tuesday." He hung up. I stood at the sink with my hands under running water and let it run cold. Tuesday, they were planning an ambush. They were coming to my house with his pregnant mistress in tow to perform some theatrical confrontation designed to overwhelm me into compliance. Lilibeth Villanueva, Adrian's mother, a woman who had never once acknowledged a mistake in her 61 years on this earth, had apparently decided the most efficient way to solve her son's infidelity was to make his wife simply disappear. I had 3 days. I used them well. I called Addie, Bernardo Tan, on Monday morning and walked her through everything. She spent 40 minutes on the phone with me, laying out exactly what I could and could not say. What constituted a legal threat versus protected speech. How the provisions of the revised penal code and family law applied to what Adrian and Ariane had done. Adultery and concubinage are not just civil issues, she said. They carry criminal consequences. With the evidence Dennis gathered, you have leverage. Hotel receipts, messages, photographs. That is Exhibit A through D right there. And the house? I asked. Peripheral property, documented, uncontested. They cannot legally compel you to vacate. If they attempt to physically remove you, that becomes unlawful eviction, on top of everything else. She paused. Maria, I want to be direct with you. If they come to your home Tuesday evening, intending what it sounds like they intend, you hold every card. Every card. That was the phrase I carried with me into Tuesday. Every card. I want to describe what it was like to watch them file in. Lilibeth came first, short, sharp-eyed, wearing the expression she always wore when she had decided she was right about something, which was always. Then came Roberto, my father-in-law, a heavy-set man who communicated primarily in grunts and had never once, in 5 years, asked me a single question about my life. Then Gina, Adrian's younger sister, who had the family's soft face and twice its talent for moral convenience. Her husband, Tomas, followed her in, and he had the decency to look uncomfortable. Finally, Adrian entered with Ariane at his side. Ariane was smaller than I had expected from the photographs, pretty in the luminous way of very young women who have not yet been worn down by anything. She wore a loose floral dress and flat sandals, and she walked into my house with her hand in Adrian's and her eyes moving slowly around the room, like she was taking inventory. Then she sat in my mother's chair. I watched her settle into it, and that was the moment. Not the hotel receipt, not the investigator's report, not even the phone call about Tuesday. That was the moment I felt something cold and clear move through me from crown to soul. Not rage, something colder than rage, something that felt like absolute crystalline certainty. I had set out tea. I want you to understand that. Before they arrived, I had made tea, arranged cups, and put out a small plate of biscuits. Not out of hospitality. I needed them seated, comfortable, invested in their performance. I needed them to believe they were in control of this room. I sat in the armchair across from them. Not my mother's chair. I sat in the wooden-framed one near the bookshelf, and I watched them arrange themselves. The unified front, the family tribunal, then I waited. Lilibeth placed her teacup down with a deliberate clink that was somehow both delicate and authoritative. A woman who had practiced that sound. Maria, she said, folding her hands in her lap. What is done is done. We are all adults here. Ariane is carrying our grandchild. A blessing. Maria, whatever the circumstances, you need to accept reality and step aside so everyone can move forward in peace. She had not asked how I was doing. She would not ask. You have served this family well. she continued, which I found almost remarkable in its condescension. And we are grateful. But you have to understand that the situation— I understand the situation perfectly, I said pleasantly. A brief silence. Then she pressed on. Good. Then you know that Ariane and Adrian need— I was not finished, I said. Lilibeth blinked. Gina jumped in before the silence could settle. Maria, look. You do not have children. Ariane does. That is just nature. If you agree to an uncontested divorce, you can both start fresh. No ugliness. No ugliness, I repeated. Yes, exactly. You brought a pregnant woman to my house to pressure me into leaving it, I said. And you are asking me to avoid ugliness. Gina opened her mouth, then closed it. Roberto cleared his throat. We need to think about the child. Adrian needs a stable home. This home. To raise his son properly. It would be best if you found somewhere else to stay by the end of the month. By the end of the month, I said softly. Yes. You are not asking for a divorce. You are asking me to vacate the premises. It is just practical. It is eviction, I said. You are attempting to evict me from my own property, so you can install your son's mistress. Ariane shifted in my mother's chair. She pressed her hand to her belly and lowered her eyes in a performance of wounded innocence that might have worked on an audience less well-researched than me. I do not want to hurt anyone, she said quietly. I truly do not. But Adrian and I love each other. Every child deserves a father and a stable home. She let her eyes move slowly around the room. The high ceilings, the Philippine hardwood floors my mother had chosen, the Kappa's shell pendant light, the wall of books. She was already redecorating. I felt the royal flush in my hands. I stood up, not dramatically, not in a rush. I stood the way my mother used to stand before she said something that ended an argument, with the unhurried calm of someone who had already won and was simply getting to her feet to collect her winnings. I walked to the side table and poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher I had left there. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. I drank 2 measured sips, set the glass down, and turned to face them. If you are finished, I said. Then it is my turn. The room went completely quiet. They had expected tears. Women in this position are supposed to cry. They are supposed to beg, or rage, or do something messy and emotional that can be dismissed later as hysteria. They were not expecting my voice to be level. They were not expecting my hands to be still. They were not expecting ice. You are operating under several significant misconceptions, I said. I would like to correct them. Adrian was staring at me. I could not read his expression anymore. I was not sure I had ever been able to. First, I said, the house. I looked at Lilibeth, at Roberto, at Gina, with her hand on Tomas's arm. This house is registered exclusively under my maiden name, Maria Concepcion de los Reyes. Paraphernal property. Property I owned before and apart from this marriage, excluded from the community of assets by explicit legal classification. Adrian's name does not appear on the title. It never has. I let that sit for 5 full seconds. That means you cannot compel me to leave. You have no legal standing in this property whatsoever. You are guests in my home. Uninvited guests who, I will note, let themselves in with a key belonging to a man who does not own this house. Lilibeth's jaw tightened. Maria, we know you are upset. I am not upset, Lilibeth. I am clarifying. I took 1 step forward. Second, you came here to discuss a peaceful divorce. I want to discuss what a peaceful divorce would actually cost your family. Roberto's face was reddening. Now, just a minute. Adultery, concubinage, criminal exposure under the revised penal code. Not just a civil embarrassment. I turned to Ariane. A married man who maintains a relationship outside his marriage and a person who knowingly participates can both face consequences. Ariane had gone quite pale. I have Dennis Aguilar's full report, I continued. Mr. Aguilar is a former NBI investigator with 19 years of service. He spent 3 weeks documenting this affair. I have hotel receipts from 6 separate stays, 214 text messages, and photographs. My attorney, Rosario Bernardo Tan, has had the report since last week. It is organized into exhibits A through D. Adrian was on his feet. Maria, please, can we just— You are in my house, Adrian, I said quietly. Sit down. he sat. I had never in my life experienced the sensation of telling my husband to sit and having him do it instantly, without argument. It was not satisfying in the way I had once imagined power would be. It was simply accurate, like a calibration. Adrian's employer, I continued, has a morality clause in his employment contract. I have reviewed it. An adultery scandal, a credible criminal filing, or any complaint of that nature would almost certainly constitute grounds for termination. I paused. I mention this not as a threat, but as context. This is the landscape you are asking me to navigate peacefully. The room was completely still. Gina's face had gone the color of old paper. And Ariane, I said. I said her name the way you say a word in a language you do not speak. Neutral, flat, precise, graciously enunciated. You are 7 months pregnant. I genuinely hope, for your child's sake, that you have considered what a criminal proceeding would mean for the next 5 years of your life. I am not saying I will pursue all of this. I am saying I can. My attorney says I have an excellent case. Ariane's eyes were bright with tears that, for once, I thought might be real. Think of the child, Gina said, her voice thin now, the bravado entirely gone. I am thinking of a child, I replied. Then I paused. Mine. The room went wrong in an interesting way. Adrian frowned. It was a specific kind of frown. The frown of a man who has just been handed information his brain is refusing to process correctly. What? He said. I was at Street Luke's yesterday, I said. Routine appointment. Doctor. Patricia Morales, OB-GYN, 12 years in practice. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and produced the folded copy of the sonogram. Real, actual, printed. I held it up briefly, then put it away. I am 5 weeks pregnant. What happened next was not a reaction so much as a detonation. Ariane made a small, airless sound, like something deflating. She pressed both hands to her stomach and slumped back into my mother's chair. Adrian lurched forward, actually lurched, like someone had shoved him, and his expression did something I had never seen his expression do in 5 years of marriage. It collapsed completely, every layer at once. All that soft charm fell away, leaving something raw and terrified underneath. You are... His voice cracked. Maria, you are pregnant? I just said that. Why did you not... He stopped. He knew why. The reason was in the room with him, sitting in the ivory armchair, with tears running down her face. Lilybeth went from steel to scramble in about 4 seconds. She stood so quickly her teacup rattled on its saucer. Oh God, Maria. She was already crossing the room toward me, arms opening, face reconstructing itself into warmth. Why did you not say something? This changes everything. We are family. You know we love you. You did not love me 11 minutes ago, I said pleasantly, taking a small step back. She stopped. 11 minutes ago, you were asking me to clear out by the end of the month. I did not mean... You meant exactly what you said. The calculation has changed for you. That is all. I have a legitimate heir now, and the optics are different. I tilted my head slightly. But I have not finished. The scramble froze. The baby, I said, may not be Adrian's. I want to tell you I had prepared for every reaction in that room. I had not fully prepared for Adrian's face. He went a color I can only describe as extinguished, like every light inside him switched off at the same time. He stared at me across the living room of the house his mother had just tried to hand to another woman, and his mouth opened, but no sound came out. What? He said finally. It came out flat, not a question, more like stunned repetition. I will not confirm paternity until after the divorce proceedings are complete, I said, my voice very steady. Given the circumstances, I think the court will understand my hesitation. It was a bluff. Let me be very clear about that. It was an absolute bluff. The baby was Adrian's, completely and without question, and I knew it. But guilt is an extraordinary mirror. When you have done the thing you are accused of, accusation becomes confession. Adrian had been unfaithful for at least 8 months. He had no moral ground to stand on, and every reason to believe I might have found the same escape route he had. His guilt made him certain it was possible. His certainty was the point. Lilybeth sat back down heavily in her chair. Roberto muttered something low and indistinct that sounded like a curse. Gina had her hand over her mouth. Tomas had the expression of a man who very much wished he had stayed home. Ariane was crying openly now, which she had every right to do. Her situation was genuinely hard. I did not feel nothing about that, but she had come into my house with 6 people, sat in my dead mother's chair, and looked around my rooms like she was choosing curtains. I had no softness left for her that night. I walked to the front door and opened it. The evening air came in. October in Quezon City, cooler than the season usually allowed. Carrying the faint smell of rain somewhere in the distance, I held the door and turned back to the room. I have already filed preliminary paperwork with Addie. Bernardo Tan, I said. This house is legally mine. That is documented and unambiguous. You are all trespassing right now, technically, given that my husband's residency here is contingent on our marriage, which I am in the process of dissolving. I checked my watch. A round-faced Seiko my mother had left me. I would like you to leave. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, I will call the police. And Ariane, if I hear of any further contact from you regarding this property or my life, my attorney will file a civil suit for psychological and emotional damages. That is on top of the criminal option. Nobody moved for a moment. They looked at me the way people look at a weather phenomenon. Something they had not factored into their plans. Something outside the range of what they had prepared for. 1 minute gone, I said. Lilybeth moved first. She gathered herself with the strained dignity of a woman who had never admitted defeat, and had therefore invented complex internal fictions to explain every loss. She did not look at me as she walked past. Roberto followed, heavy-footed and quiet. Gina pulled Tomas by the arm, and they left without speaking. Ariane rose from the ivory armchair. She stood there for a moment, and I watched her. I watched her face, the youth of it, the real tears on it, the complicated future written across it. I felt something. Not guilt, not cruelty. Something more like, this is what his choices built. This is the wreckage of a soft-faced man. She left. Adrian was last. He stood in the doorway for a long time. He looked like someone trying to find a version of this moment where something was still salvageable and finding nothing. His eyes were red. Maria, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The baby. Is it actually? Goodbye, Adrian. He stood there another moment. Then he walked out. I closed the door. The lock clicked. That sound, clean and definitive, a small mechanical fact, went all the way through me. I stood alone in my house for a while. In my mother's house. I put my hand on my stomach. 5 weeks. A fact. A small, solid, entirely real fact in the wreckage of what had been my marriage. Then I walked back to the living room and stood in front of the ivory armchair. I smoothed the embroidered edge with my fingertips, the same edge Ariane had been touching, and I stood there until the room felt like mine again. It did not take long. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. Addie, Bernardo Tan called me at 10:22 in the morning, and her voice had the particular satisfied flatness of a woman who had done her job completely. The house remained in my name, uncontested. Adrian's legal team had initially floated the idea of challenging the property classification, and A.T. Bernardo Tan had, in her words, addressed that quickly. They withdrew the challenge within 2 weeks. I did not pursue the criminal charges. Not because I was soft. I want to be clear about that. I did not pursue them because I had calculated, the way my mother always calculated, what justice would actually cost me in time, money, and attention, and what it would actually produce. The divorce was the point. The house was the point. The child was the point. Adrian lost his job anyway. Not because of a criminal filing, because a colleague had seen him with Ariane in a hotel lobby 3 months before any of this came to a head, and once the separation became publicly known in their office, that colleague mentioned it to HR. The morality clause took care of the rest. As far as I know, Adrian is now living in a rented apartment in Marikina. Ariane had the baby, a boy, just as Lilybeth had always said. I do not know the details, and I do not seek them. I sent a congratulations card. I want to be honest about that. I do not entirely know why I did it. Maybe because the child is genuinely not at fault for any of this. Maybe because my mother would have. My own child, a girl, as it turned out, was born in April. Dr. Morales delivered her at Street Luke's at 6:43 in the morning, and she came out with her eyes open. The nurses said that was unusual. She looked around the room with the calm curiosity of someone assessing a situation. I recognized that look immediately. I named her Elena. She sleeps in the room my mother painted yellow in 1989. Under the Kappa's shell light, I have never changed, in the house that has always been ours. Some days, I walk through these rooms and try to feel the ghost of that terrible evening. The teacups. The 6 people. The pregnant woman in the ivory chair. I look for whatever scar it left. Mostly, what I feel is something I can only describe as clean, like a surface after all the compromises have been stripped away, and what remains is the true material underneath. Hard, durable, mine. My mother used to say there are 2 kinds of women in the world. Women who wait to see what they are left with, and women who decide from the start what they are keeping. She built this house with her hands, her absence, and her will. She put my name on the title. She put a lawyer's number in my phone. She told me not to be soft. I was not soft. I closed the door on the whole wretched parade of them, stood in the house my mother built, and decided what I was keeping. Elena and I are keeping everything.